I know I kept you waiting for a while, so if you're here for this one, then thank you. There are plenty of channels to watch around here that do the things they do for the money, or for the numbers, and some for the plaques, or the events, or the free stuff from corporate sponsors, or whatever. But I make these videos because it's something that I love to do. Every part of it is worth going through. When I'm wrong, I get to learn more. When I'm right, I get to teach a little bit. Throughout all of it, I get to create, be a part of this experience with everybody who comes around, and I get to hear the stories of the passing internet traffic. When you come to these videos and you hear me talking about myself and my experience in the games, don't just stop here and listen to me. You all leave comments down there, so remember to take the time out and read the comments from each other. I'm not the only person with a story, and I know that there are a lot of other people who share their stories for a reason. The experience is what I'm here for the most. If you've been around here for any length of time, then you already know that I'm no stranger to fighting games, or really fighting in general. I've watched hundreds of them. I train personally, hoping one day I have the chance to fight at least once professionally. But while I'm working on that, I'm willing to settle for the short burst adrenaline I get from playing fighting games. So today, we're going to take a look at 2 Pride Fighting Championship games for the PS2. Thank you to everybody who suggested the main game. I never actually got a request for the second one, but it wouldn't be right to do one without the other. Let's get started. Pride FC, developed by Anchor and published by Capcom in Japan and THQ everywhere else, is a mixed martial arts game based on the real-world Pride Fighting Championship. If you're not into fighting, then boy do I have a story for you. Back in 1997, a few veterans of the shoot wrestling industry got together and decided they wanted to host real fights. For 9 solid years, things were good. Pride was on top of the world, having set the record for the highest live spectator count in MMA history. But that all came crashing down in 2007, when Japanese tabloids everywhere exposed a lot of deep internal ties to various Yakuza families. There were rumors of mass fight fixing, ticket-selling pyramid schemes, and some other really crazy stuff.
That's fucking illegal.
Because of that, the entire event was essentially banned from broadcasting in Japan, which led to a massive financial downturn. In the end, Pride was purchased by the UFC. But the controversy still doesn't end there. After the acquisition was final, it was discovered that the majority of fighter contracts were illegal.
That's fucking illegal.
Which meant the UFC had to offer an entirely new contract to almost every fighter that they intended to keep. In the end, all the UFC really bought was a collection of Pride FC events that they couldn't really do anything with. Later on in 2015, the former executives of Pride went on to form the Ryzen Fighting Federation. I can't think of any controversies with Ryzen apparently. I think they just put on pretty good fights. And as far as Anchor goes, we've actually seen them before. They were responsible for the original Ultimate Fighting Championship on the Dreamcast. The founders of Anchor, the Onoguchi brothers, stated that the company wanted to specialize in 3D fighting games. I can't say I had the greatest experience with any of the UFC games, but I'm always open-minded to the idea that it could be made better. There's no career, which isn't really a big deal. Instead of a career or a traditional fighting game arcade ladder, we get to participate in a Grand Prix ladder that can be set up in a couple of different ways. You can go through the process of assigning an individual spot to every fighter, or you can select your fighter only and let the game decide what the rest of the tournament will look like. I chose the latter because I wanted a closer to normal arcade experience. There's also an endless survival mode, but I always think those are horrifically boring, so we'll just ignore that. There's a playable roster of familiar Pride fighters, and Hoist Gracie even makes an appearance. He wasn't fighting in the UFC after 1995, and the original Ultimate Fighting Championship game came out just before UFC 27 in August of 2000. So even though Semaphore still owned the UFC back then, it makes sense now why he wasn't a playable character in those. The gameplay is exactly what I was told it would be. It's another game built on the original Ultimate Fighting Championship, except this is the undeniable best iteration of that whole thing. It's still a Tekken-style 3D fighter where attacks are mapped to each individual limb, and sidesteps are still fluid, so there aren't any aerial attacks. There's a much bigger variety of combos to perform as every fighter, which means the fighting itself has gotten a lot more depth. The health and stamina meters have been completely rebalanced, so now throwing an attack at a block will only take away half of the stamina that you lose if you get hit. Sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's bigger. I'm not completely sure on the exact difference, but you're a lot less likely to get KO'd because you were lashing out for an opening. By far the best thing this game did is fix the submissions. Instead of sporadically performing reversals to avoid an instant tap out hoping the RNG's on your side, you can now mash to fight your way out of a submission. And they kept the reversals in place to give you even more leeway. Better still, there wasn't ever a moment where I felt like the RNG was working against me. Reversal and fight back inputs worked precisely for my entire time playing. This is a pretty exact fix to my biggest complaint with all 5 of those UFC games. It makes a tremendous difference. Visually, it's on par with UFC UFC Tap Out 1. It's a little bit better in some ways, but overall they're very similar in style. Something I feel I should mention is the 2D crowd. When I talked about Def Jam Vendetta, I couldn't really get behind the crowds for each map because it looked like an incoherent mix of 2D sprites and 3D models. Pride FC is a good example of how to do this correctly. The 3D models in the crowd here are all in the foreground, close to the ring, while all of the 2D sprites are filling up a tremendous portion of the background of the stage. This is what cohesive multi-dimensional depth looks like when it's done correctly. Think about it like depth of field, or the focus on a camera. The thing within focus should have a lot more definition, and everything out of focus shouldn't. This is exactly that same principle, but with 2D sprites and 3D models. When it's done wrong, it can be a pretty big distraction. The soundtrack is rather amazing. There's a good mix of metal, EDM, and rap, and the majority of it is obscure stuff. There are a few names I recognize like Shadow's Fall, Killswitch Engage, Plan 9, Agent Orange, and the one song from Darude that everybody played for the memes. But then there's a bunch of shit that I've never heard of before, like San Quinn, Dislocated Styles, Carvin Knowles, and a few more. I couldn't find a playlist with the whole soundtrack together, but the entire thing is listed in the rolling credits if you want to know what it is. Finally, there is real-world fight footage, and it's just great. Rapid, unadulterated violence from some of the best fights in Pride FC's history. Next to motocross and bull riding, fighters know better than anybody else just how short life is. The journey to become a fighter is long and excruciating, but so many of them get started because life has already put them through much worse. When you step into the ring, you understand that a mistake could mean ending your career permanently, injuring yourself, or even losing your life. But life is too short to let the fear of those things take control. So they don't dwell on the maybe, the what if, or the why. They just go out and they give it everything they've got. With all that out of the way, I'll go ahead and give Pride FC a rating of 8 out of 10. It only took me 20 minutes to recognize and appreciate all of the improvements in this game, but I kept playing beyond that. The improvements are so crazy good that I forgot about all of those other UFC games for a while and just sank in and had fun. If any one of those games had this same level of cleanliness and balance, this would be one of the most standout fighting game series in history. This game is proof that those others easily could have been better games, and the biggest problem was fixed with the most simple and elegant solution possible. I definitely recommend checking this one out if you're a fan of fighting games. I had a really good time. Next up, Pride Grand Prix 2003, developed by Dream Factory and published by Capcom as a Japanese exclusive. We've seen Dream Factory before. I talked about them a little bit in the UFC games video, but there's something else I failed to mention about them. Dream Factory was the development studio primarily responsible for the notorious PS2 launch title, The Bouncer. I'll admit, I've been trying to avoid talking about Square and their games for a while now, personally, but more and more ties to them pop up all over the place, and soon it'll be unavoidable. There are 126 Final Fantasy games at the time of writing this video, and life is too short for that shit. That aside, I'm expecting this to at least be similar in quality to the first one. Before anything else, the Grand Prix is pretty much the same here as it was the last time. Fight your way through a few different fighters along the tournament bracket and eventually become the champion. You can select from one of many different fighters, and you can create your own, so it's all in line with the other games. The gameplay is also mostly the same thing. It's the same Tekken-style clone that it was before, and the move combinations and grapples and submissions are all pretty much the same. The only real difference between this and the other one is how clunky this one feels in comparison. The other Pride game really felt a hell of a lot smoother than this, and it also felt like it had a way larger variety of things you could do. That being said, this one does have a few unique ideas, like dodge mechanics and a counter hit system that's a little more noticeable. The thing that I'm the most grateful for in both of these games, though, still, is the ability to fight out of the submission and grab instead of reversing everything. I think the thing that holds this one back is the lack of combo variety for each fighter, because there are a lot of fighters to play with, but not a lot of moves to play with. But putting that aside, it's very close to the other. Visually, this one is a lot uglier than the other one, but honestly, all of these games have been pretty ugly, so this actually just looks standard when you compare it to the others. It's about as good as UFC Tap Out on the Xbox. The craziest thing about all of these games together, I think, is that the weird visuals all make them a lot more charming. Even the ones that aren't good are still memorable for the meme material. Things like the faces of the fighters, or the weird movements, or the moments where the models merge with other models. I know I do a lot of criticizing around here, but I mean it when I say that I learned something from every single one of them. I learn what to do, what not to do, do, or what could have been done and wasn't done right. There's a lot to take away from every game. The first most observable part of all games is the visuals, so games like this really add more perspective to just how broad the spectrum of fidelity among games really is. The soundtrack is in line with the rest of the games, so there really isn't much to say. There's some licensed music because of the fighters, there's some original music, and the sound effects and the announcer all sound really good. When it comes to fighting games, I don't pay very much attention to the sound because usually I want to listen to some other music from a playlist that I put together. The one exception to that would probably be Def Jam Icon. Still, I feel like it's good to mention that the sound design is good, because there are those out there who do pay attention to the sound design in fighting games, and this one is pretty interesting for what it is. Finally, there is real-world footage here, but I couldn't watch it because I couldn't figure out how to get rid of the insane fragmenting in the FMV. Since that's the case, I want to do something that I don't normally do and talk about how important it is to highlight these videos. One of the greatest things humanity does is document stuff. When action sports games, or games with real footage of any kind crop up, we usually only remember the footage for as long as we play the game. It's a cool bit of flair on the entertainment in the moment. But so many of these games have videos that are important collections of the histories of their sports. They serve to be a document of the real world to show off just what's possible. Because the best way to prove anything is to see it happen for yourself. There's nothing more inspiring than looking at it and watching something amazing become a possibility. And that's what these do. And you never really know if they'll just disappear one day, and this is the only place you'll find them. With all of that out of the way, I'll go ahead and give Pride GP 2003 a rating of 6 out of 10. Compared to the previous entry, it isn't as good. But just because I give a game an average rating, or a below average rating, or even a bad rating really doesn't matter. I tell it how I see it when I play these games, and not everybody sees things the way I do. So if you feel like I've ever been unfair to any of these games, or you have your own opinion about a game and you think I'm wrong, then stand by that opinion, because I'm not here to persuade you. You should always trust yourself above everything. Don't just take my word for it with these games. If you see one that you think I might be wrong about, then I definitely recommend playing it yourself. With this game in particular, I recommend checking it out because it's good enough as a fighting game, and it's probably a lot better if you've got friends for multiplayer. I had a good amount of fun with it, and I'm glad that I played both of these games. Now that I'm done with all of that, I was originally going to do the last SSX game for the next video, but a game just came out that I've been dying to talk about for a long time now. It's something familiar, but totally new. Something we've seen 100 times, but like nothing we've ever seen before. To make it better, it was developed by one of you in the audience. I won't tell you exactly what it is, but the person who made it knows what it is, and there are some of you who probably already know. So until next time, thank you, and have a nice day.